I am joined by our Science Editor Tom Clarke to answer your questions on the news that UK regulators have decided that people under 30 should not be given the AstraZeneca vaccine due to concerns over a very rare risk of blood clots. OK, Tom, give us a summary of exactly what's been said, because this is going to cause a lot of concern, isn't it?
It is. And as you know, there's been lots of speculation brewing for a while since various European countries started reporting issues with blood clots. Now, it's important to say these are not your ordinary type of blood clot. They are particular syndrome, which is what caused the alarm. It's such a rare thing. Typically, when it started occurring in more than numbers than you'd expect, it raised the alarm. It's a type of blood clot linked to a very low level of something called platelets in the blood. Now, it's quite technical, but it's platelets that make the blood clot. So it's quite a medical oddity. It is known to occur very rarely as a sort of immune system side effect thing. But when they still started to see numbers, they looked into it. They've now established, although they cannot prove a link, they are now pretty convinced there is something going on, to the point that today they've announced on the benefit, in the benefit of safety, that for those people who are at the lowest risk of COVID, therefore, this very, very small risk of this blood clotting syndrome associated with the vaccine. And remember, we're looking at sort of 4 cases out of 1 million doses given, so it's very, very rare. Still, that tips the balance of benefits and risks away from the vaccine for people under 30 who are at the lowest risk of getting severe illness and dying from COVID.
You see, this is what I think is so interesting, as speaking as a complete civilian on this, is I would have thought logically, the risks of this would be for older people, as the risks of COVID are greater for older people. But what you're saying is it's all about that balance. So if you're at lower risk of COVID, therefore, relatively, your risk associated with the vaccine is higher.
That's right. That's almost the interesting thing about what's been done today. It's less about your risk of getting a blood clot from the vaccine. It's more about what your risk from COVID is, because we know the vaccine is very effective at preventing you getting COVID, and it's extremely good at protecting you from dying from COVID. So as your risk of COVID goes up, therefore the benefits of the vaccine go up.
Right.
Whereas when you get to that lower end of the age spectrum, it's also true to say there is some signal that this risk of blood clots associated with the vaccine, this rare blood clotting syndrome, is going up slightly with reducing age. So younger people might be at slightly higher risk the younger they get. So that, again,
it's so weird. It's kind of counterintuitive.
It's very strange, and it's why it's taken them a few weeks after the flag was originally raised to conclude this. Because it's so rare, that makes it hard. The statistics are very difficult to do. But also, what's the plausible explanation for why this is happening? One of the questions, maybe somebody's asked this and we'll come on to it, why are we seeing this with the AstraZeneca vaccine? We're not seeing it with the several other vaccines which have exactly the same antigen, the bit of the virus that challenged the immune system. Why are we seeing it with this one but not the others?
And do we know that we're definitely not seeing it with the others?
Based on the data we've got, this comes from the US and from Europe, it's about 50 times higher, this rare blood clotting syndrome with the AstraZeneca vaccine than compared to Pfizer, for example. So there's definitely something very much to do with the AstraZeneca vaccine. What it is and what's causing it, that's the ongoing project. That's what they want to find out.
OK. I have so many questions I want to ask you, but we have asked our viewers for questions. So, reluctantly, I think I better do as I'm told here. All right, so we've lots and lots of you have offered questions, and thank you very much indeed for that. First one I'm going to go for is from Amber Gig. Thank you, Amber. I'm 24 years old, she says, and I've received my first jab of the AstraZeneca, which is unusual for a 24-year-old, I suppose. Maybe she's got some special case. Should I be concerned about getting my next one? What's the general advice for anyone under 30 who has already had their first jab?
This is a really important question. It's also, I think, the question we're getting asked the most today as well, because let's remember they've really slowed down giving first doses now, particularly the AstraZeneca jab, partly because of supply issues. So most people being offered it, it's for their second dose. Firstly, what I'd say to anyone who's over Amber's age, in the 50 and above age group that's being offered a second dose, you should go and get it anyway, because the benefits of the vaccine massively outweigh this risk.
OK, so I'm 57 and I've had my first one. I should definitely
you shouldn't.
Okay.
But the other reassuring thing, certainly for someone like Amber, is that all the 79 cases of this rare blood clotting syndrome that have been seen were found after the first dose of the jab.
Within what sort of time period?
It's between 4 and 28 days. They haven't seen any cases after a 28-day period, and nothing seems to have manifested itself before 4 days. So they are pretty sure that it's something that you're going to get in response to the first dose of the vaccine. So if you've had the first dose and did not have any serious side effects, you should have no concerns whatsoever about going to get your second dose.
OK. A similar sort of question, Stacey Torrance, 31, she said, I've had AstraZeneca. Does that mean that I'm not at risk?
I wouldn't want to call that because I haven't seen the data. I'm not a specialist in this area, but based on what we know, given that they've only seen this adverse event happen in response to that first dose, you could infer from the information we've been given that yes, the risk, if you had any risk, you didn't respond to the vaccine in that way, you're safe to go and get your second dose. And that's certainly what they're encouraging people to do. Go and get that second dose. It will massively boost the immune response you've got and make it longer lasting as we still have COVID circulating, and you'll be much safer as a result. OK,
we've had a number of questions asking, how long after the vaccine are people getting these blood clots? Hours, days, weeks. You've answered that. Could you tell me what the symptoms are of blood? How do you know if you've got a blood clot?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a pretty rare and weird thing. Actually, that kind of helps in raising, a symptom profile for what you might want to look out for. A severe headache. Now, a lot of people, this is quite a tricky one because a lot of people report getting a very, very bad headache after having the vaccine, maybe for the 24 hours afterwards. If that headache persists for more than 4 days, if it is seriously a severe headache, that is potentially one symptom. Swelling in the legs, chest pains are other symptoms as well. And also pinpricks on the surface of the skin of sort of blood sort of type pinpricks on the skin, bruising that's not associated with the vaccination site has been listed as another symptom. And obviously, if you have any of those, difficulty breathing is another symptom. If you have any of those, you should call 111, call your GP, certainly get medical advice.
OK, and these little pinprick marks, is that all over or is that patches or just in one area?
I think what I've read, it's patches on the surface of the skin because the blood clots, the thrombosis that's being caused are in the veins, which are closest to the surface of the skin, as I understand it. But that's only some people have that symptom. That's the other thing about this syndrome. It's affecting different people in different ways. And I have to say this again, I'll keep saying it as we go on. It's really rare. 4 out of 1 million people who've had the vaccine have had this event. So, don't worry that you're going to be one of them. It is extremely small, but if you have one of these untoward symptoms, well, I suppose it's probably sensible to say if you have any concerns at all, I'm not sure your doctor would mind you giving them a call.
No, sounds sensible. Hannah Hardwell says, I have a rare blood clotting disorder and I've had multiple blood clots. I've had my first AstraZeneca vaccine. Should I be having my second?
Now, that really is a question for a medical professional, because one of the pieces of advice they gave today quite clearly was for those people who have a history of blood clots, they should not be advised to have the AstraZeneca vaccine. So in this case, that her vaccine clearly predated that piece of advice. I've just gone and said, get your second dose if you're offered. But I think in that particular case, seeing as they do have a blood clotting disorder, maybe it's worth checking with a specialist first.
OK, so Hannah, there you heard it from us there. You contact your doctor, basically. All right, another question here from Erica Gunner. Thank you, Erica. How can the scientists be sure that this is a very good one, the second dose won't affect you if you've had no problems from the first one? How many people who did develop clots did so after having the second one? You say no?
I think we've addressed that. From what we were told today by the MHRA that's reviewed this data, all of these 79 cases occurred in people after their first dose of the vaccine. Bearing in mind, lots of people in the UK, we've done 5 million people fully vaccinated now. Some of those will also be Pfizer, but I would guess we've done a couple of million at least people with a second dose. Those sorts of numbers would have shown some cases of this blood clot if it was affecting people after a second dose. And as we understand it, based on the evidence we've got today, it's not occurring in people after their second dose. So yes, again, back to what we said before.
All right. Philip Niblett says, I've had my first dose of the Oxford one back in February, AstraZeneca, back in February, as I'm extremely clinically vulnerable. So what happens now for my second one I'm currently waiting on? Is there going to be vaccine mixing?
Now, vaccine mixing is something they're looking into, but you can't just go ahead and gamely mix up your vaccines before you've done a clinical trial to show that that's going to give you not just it be safe, there's no reason to think it would be unsafe, but that it's going to give you sufficient protection from the virus. Those trials are ongoing. I don't know yet whether a doctor might advise mixing doses. It's something a doctor is licensed and able to do, but I'm not sure about that. Given he's clinically vulnerable and has already had one dose, he should go ahead and get the second one. Because remember, the advice today for people who are clinically vulnerable, even if they're under 30, their risk of COVID outweighs the very, very small risk of the vaccine, so they should still go ahead and get it.
OK. Another one about this second dose question, Samuel Carvalho. I'm 26, he said. I had my first AstraZeneca vaccine in January. I'm due my second jab in the next 2 to 3 weeks. I still want the second AstraZeneca vaccine. Will I be able to get it? I don't want Pfizer or Moderna. He doesn't say why, but he doesn't anyway.
Absolutely. So. You will be able to get it. And remember, they haven't prohibited the vaccine for the under 30s. They have told people under 30, they're advised to get an alternative, to be given an alternative if one is available. But if you've had one already, I think it would probably be natural, because we haven't done the trials to allow the vaccine mix. I think it would be inevitable that he will get a second dose of AstraZeneca and should be very comfortable and confident in having that.
OK. Chris says, I'm in the next age group up, 30 to 39. Am I able to choose one of the other vaccines?
As far as we know so far, people haven't been given a choice. You are offered an appointment. What's being offered at that day is the one that you will get. We know that people, I mean, this is the sort of the biggest ethical quandary, if you will. What if I'm 31? You know, they've drawn this cut-off, 32, 33. They've had to draw an arbitrary line, if you will, at a defined age point. So it is a very relevant question. I asked that specific question to the JCVI, the people who decide who gets these vaccines today. What should I do if I'm 31? They said it's a tough one. It's up to you, ultimately. Now, I suppose if you do not want to receive the AstraZeneca vaccine, that's one that's being offered to you now, you have an option. You can wait. You can just wait until your GP or the vaccination centre that's closest to you is offering a different jab, and you can get it. That is your choice. No one can make you have a vaccine of a particular type or a vaccine at all. That's how the system works. That's how we do medicine, thankfully, in the UK. But you can wait. Obviously, you have to then consider, is my risk of waiting greater than my risk of getting this vaccine and potentially, or not getting this vaccine and potentially getting COVID? Yeah.
But that's the problem, isn't it? We, as you know, we're mere mortals. We're not medical specialists or scientists or whatever. We don't have the information necessarily. None of us do, and particularly not people who aren't medically qualified.
I think the other thing we've got to bear in mind when you're factoring this in, what we've been talking about here is the risk of death. That's the one they've looked at, because obviously that's the most grave outcome you can consider. But something else to throw into the mix here, if you're a young person, your risk of long COVID is as high as somebody who's in their late middle age into their sort of 60s. It starts to drop off long COVID as people get older.
And it can be really serious.
And it can be very serious. So you're not just thinking about your risk of death here. You are thinking about that 1 in 100, I think some of the cases are of long COVID, people have illness lasting more than 12 weeks. That could be debilitating. We don't even know how long some of these people are going to suffer with long COVID for. That's something to factor in. The other thing to weigh into this equation, and they pointed this out quite clearly earlier today, this risk-benefit calculation for the under 30s is based on the level of infection right now. Right? Things are quite low. We've got infection rates about 1 in 400, 1 in 500 in the UK. At the January peak, when risk of infection was much, much higher, 1 in 40, actually, even for people under 30, they would have been better off getting this vaccine, because the risk of them getting COVID and getting seriously ill was higher than any risk of this very rare blood clotting disorder. So it kind of depends when in the pandemic you're faced. Now, right now, I think you've maybe got the time and the peace of mind of not getting COVID and maybe trying hard to avoid COVID to sit and make that decision, maybe wait for another vaccine. But, you know, if things look different, if new variants come on the scene, you know, who knows, that you may want to make a different personal choice.
Yeah. Tony says, is this decision going to impact on the 40 to 49 age group? And when will they move on to offering the vaccines to this age group?
We're not really sure about this yet, because we know that because of supply issues with the AstraZeneca vaccine, they've actually halted new appointments for people under 50. So I'm 48. I'm waiting for my first jab, and I haven't been offered it yet. I might have to wait till the beginning of May. They've said there'll be no new first dose appointments through the month of April. It's possible by May there could be supplies of the Moderna vaccine. We're also quite soon going to get deliveries of the Janssen vaccine, which is a single dose with an adjuvant added to give you just a one-dose protection. From
and there's
COVID.
A Johnson one, is there? Coming
That's Janssen. Johnson is Janssen. Okay. Sorry, it's one of these double names. There's also a vaccine by a company called Novavax, which could be coming later in the summer. So it's entirely possible we'll have more than enough alternative vaccines to give people. I'd imagine for people in my age group, like the gentleman's question, we may be offered an AstraZeneca jab, but because supplies are small, it might end up being Pfizer or Moderna or something else, so it might be a moot point altogether.
And just a side issue, talking about these other vaccines that are coming down the line, there are Chinese vaccines and Russian vaccines, aren't there, which are already being distributed in those countries. What chance is there of them coming here, and could they help us?
We haven't ordered those vaccines here in the UK, and remember, we have got on order more than enough vaccine than we need to vaccinate the entire population and then some, possibly double. So we're pretty flush with vaccines. So I doubt we'll be getting those vaccines on stream. Another thing to bear in mind, the Chinese and Russian vaccine, the Sputnik vaccine, are based on an identical technology to the Oxford AstraZeneca one.
Are they? Okay.
Now, we haven't got any negative safety data from those vaccines. I must hasten to add that. But in some of the countries where they're being deployed, they don't have the same sophisticated yellow card adverse event reporting things like we have in this country, which has flagged up this extremely rare event. And we should be obviously very grateful today the fact that system is working to have highlighted this rare disorder. But there is the potential, of course, because they're very similar vaccines. We don't know yet, but we might end up finding out there are similar, very, very low risks associated with them too. We don't know yet.
OK. Moving on, Joy says, do we know the age breakdown of the 79... Oh, this is a good question. Do we know the age breakdown of the 79 people who have suffered the blood clot issue in question?
We do, and I'll have to apologise, Joy. I didn't bring the piece of paper down with me into the studio, but I'm going to go from memory here. Forgive me if I'm wrong, but I believe 11 of those cases were under 50. No, that's more than that. No, that's fatalities. 11 of the fatalities were in people under 50 and 3 were in people under 30. I think the majority of cases were in the 50s and below. But I'm sorry, no, I'm afraid I don't have those numbers to hand, so I probably shouldn't wing it. But I know in terms of deaths, it was 11 in 50s and below and 3 in 30 and below.
And bearing in mind you haven't got the data with you, would it be wrong to ask you, was it male, female oriented?
There was a skew definitely towards women in that final breakdown. I think the majority of cases were in women, but there were 27 or 28 of the 79 were men. So it doesn't sort of fall particularly evenly. There's potentially a slight bias towards women. Certainly in Norway and in Germany, there was a definite bias towards women and younger women in the data they got. However, what's not clear yet, and again, I would say this probably about the UK data as well, we're not looking at a kind of unbiased sample of people here. Here in the UK, we gave the AstraZeneca vaccine predominantly to older people. It's only now we start to give it to younger people that the signal's shown up. Whereas in Europe, remember, they banned the vaccine for older people, so they ended up giving it to a lot of their younger healthcare workers. I think in Norway, a large number of female healthcare workers were given the AstraZeneca vaccine, which they have acknowledged now probably skewed their data towards women. So I wouldn't read too much into those numbers that I can't remember. I'm really sorry. And don't quote me on those. I can dig them out and put them on.
All right. We can.
Well, they're in the blog that I wrote earlier if you're interested.
Okay, will do. John says, well, this is a good one as well. I was going to ask the same, actually. Will taking a low dose of aspirin mitigate the potential side effect of a blood clot if you have the vaccine? Because they always say that, don't they? If you are at risk of blood clots, take aspirin. Does it work or is it something different?
This is one of those cases where I have to say I am not a doctor and I'm not going to pretend to be one. However, I do know that people on blood thinning medicines, for example, for blood clots, because this disorder is not linked to the traditional blood clotting mechanism, which is the platelets in your blood. It's actually caused, we're seeing blood clots in people with very low platelet counts. My guess would be it would have no benefit or no effect at all. This is something we're seeing, it's a very unusual blood clotting disorder that seems to be linked to something going on with the immune system in response to the vaccine. Don't forget, and I think this is something we haven't mentioned so far, but it's really important, there's something weird going on with COVID and blood clots, because we know for a fact that one of the biggest risk factors you've got at the moment for blood clots is COVID itself. It causes very high risk of blood clots in people who end up in hospital. I think up to 30% of people who end up in ITU with COVID have serious blood clots in their lungs, in their legs, in their, and can have strokes and blood clots in the brain as well. So it certainly causes sticky blood. So it's a bit of a medical mystery. I would guess, though, treatments for blood clotting disorders not going to have anything to do with it. But it would be worse if he's taking aspirin because he's got a blood clotting disorder. He should probably seek advice before getting the AstraZeneca vaccine anyway, given this latest advice.
OK, all right. And a question from Matthew here. Will this decision prolong the amount of time it will take for under 30s to receive their first jab, he says? Is there enough supply of Pfizer and Moderna to meet the current timetable the government has set?
It's difficult to know that at this point. The government, as always with these things, has reassured everyone it'll be fine. We'll have bumps along the vaccine pipeline way. I mean, as we understand it, there are alternatives coming. And it's likely, given we're going to get to the under 30s quite a lot further down the process, into the early summer, I would speculate that by the time we get to that, the system will have sorted itself out in terms of those alternative vaccines. I think the bigger question would be people my age or maybe in their sort of 39 to 40 age bracket. What's going to happen to them? Will things slow down and speed up? Because certainly we are going down there's a definite reduction. In fact, I think the lowest number of first doses have been offered today since they started the vaccine rollout back in the beginning of the year, because now, of course, the priority is to give the second doses and let all those the full vaccination coverage, the second dose, and all the people who've already had their first.
But that was already scheduled, wasn't it?
That was scheduled, but it has caused a significant drop-off in the speed of those first doses offered. And I'm assuming ideally they wouldn't want to do that. They want to run both channels at parallel at the greatest speed. But we know we have had supply issues with the AstraZeneca vaccine that we don't expect to last forever, but we are currently seeing that. As I understand it, supplies of the Pfizer vaccine, although they've been slower at times, are continuing at a kind of fairly steady pace for the time being.
OK. Tom, do you think it was inevitable that something like this would happen? There have been naysayers right from the beginning saying it's too soon, it's too quick, there hasn't been time to assess this thing properly.
What I would say is this, is lots of drugs have serious side effects at very low rates. I had a conversation with a vaccine safety expert the other day who said, given the way we normally distribute vaccines, which is in a slow, trickled out but you could have a side effect like this with vaccines that are already in circulation that we would never even know about, because it's so rare, it would barely register on anybody's radar. It might be a symptom of the fact we've given this vaccine as part of a national rollout. It's all been pushed out at the same time, and we're scrutinising it, understandably, very, very closely, because even though these were trialled in a very conventional way with all the safety checks in place, we did do that at speed. So obviously there's been a real effort to make sure that, that they are safe. So I actually think this isn't an anomaly. We shouldn't be surprised at all that we've detected a safety effect with the vaccine. I mean, you could even say it's possibly surprising we haven't seen safety issues with many of these other vaccines because of how closely related they are. So I would say, actually, this isn't a sort of damning indictment. It certainly doesn't challenge the question of whether we've cut corners and done things at speed, because these vaccines are overwhelmingly safe. We detected this rare side effect, obviously not early enough to save the lives of that very small number of healthy young people who will have had this severe side effect, and some have died, and that is tragic and will require a lot of sort of looking into and analysis to find out what happened and what went wrong. But side effects of medicines are a fact of life, and actually the level that we're seeing here isn't sort of outside the realms of what we've seen with other medicines in the past. So I think that's not particularly surprising.
So nothing is without risk. No medicine certainly is without any risk.
That's true. Yeah, absolutely.
So your message to those watching who might be extremely hesitant, might have always been hesitant about getting a vaccine, and might be feeling more hesitant as a result of what they've heard today, what would you say?
I'd say this isn't... You have to look at the numbers. Trust the numbers and the probability. We've got really good evidence now for what the risks of COVID are. Now, the younger you get, it is true, your risk of actually dying from COVID is low. So I think as you contemplate getting a vaccine, you have to factor that in. But don't forget, 4 in a million, 1 in a 250,000 chance of having a side effect is very, very small. It's up to you, I suppose, to decide whether you think that small risk outweighs the far more credible risk, if you're sort of in those older age groups, of COVID. Not forgetting long COVID, factor that into the equation as well. But ultimately, it's not for me to decide what somebody does. I'm trying to put those numbers out there. Ultimately, I think that's up to the individual. But be reminded that, there are lots of medicines. We've used the contraceptive pill as an example. That raises a woman's risk of having a severe blood clot, similar to the ones that this vaccine is causing, actually, by about 8-fold.
Or HRT or any of those things.
Exactly. So those are known risks, and we accept them for the benefits that those treatments give. That is up to the individual if they should be given that information when presented with the medicine. And I think now, and this is the case, when someone goes to AstraZeneca vaccine now, this blood clotting risk will, by law, have to be explained to them. So you're being equipped with that information, but ultimately that is your decision. I would say, though, looking at the numbers, if you're over 30, the odds, really are very much in your favour for getting the vaccine. I know for a fact, I don't expect anyone to listen to what I have to say on this particular matter. It is my decision, but I would jump at the chance to be offered the AstraZeneca vaccine tomorrow if my turn came up, because I know my risk of getting serious illness from COVID is much, much greater than that vaccine risk.
And I have to say I agree. Again, no one listened to me, but it's it's a personal thing, isn't it? Tom, thank you.
My pleasure.
For putting that all into some perspective. And that's all we can do, really, is offer the numbers, offer the science,
well, I hope it was helpful.
Decision. OK, thank you. And that's it for this coronavirus Q&A. You can get more information and analysis on the AstraZeneca vaccine decision on our website. That's itv.com/news. Thank you very much for your questions and indeed for joining us. Bye-bye.